Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to your weekly installation of Mondays with Mendy. There we go. I'm Mendy, and today we are going to discuss the all too familiar problem with envy or jealousy. And yes, it still exists in society today. Much as that might come as a shock to you, it's actually one of the most influential and fundamental problems in society today, and really can be found at the root of so many quarrels, divorces, emancipations, and literally the decay of relationships in every way, shape, or form. A lot of that can be tracked back to jealousy. So we're going to talk about this green-eyed monster and why it plays such an important role and how it can actually become a force for good. Jealousy and envy can actually be utilized in a very positive way if we're able to harness it. And we'll use insight and perspective from the weekly Torah portion, as we do every week, to help us guide us through this conversation. As always, you can chat or share any questions you might have at any time by clicking the chat button below. Just below the screen, there should be a little button that says chat, and you can use that to ask any questions in real time, and they can be answered right here, right now, as we communicate. Let's start off with a little story. A story told about a man named Mr. Katz. And Mr. Katz lived a comfortable lifestyle, but his neighbor Bernie, who lived across the street, now Bernie really lived well. Bernie had the beautiful house with the neatly manicured lawn. Bernie had the brand new Lexus in his driveway. Bernie really had a wonderful, wonderful life. And what frustrated Mr. Katz to no end was the fact that Bernie really was not a very intelligent person. Just wasn't that much of a smart guy. And frankly, he really didn't work that hard. Wasn't that smart, did not work that hard, and yet he had been so fortunate in business because, due to a large part of the fact that he had simply had good fortune. He was lucky. Happens, some people are just born that way, or they get hit with the book every once in a while, but he was lucky and he was very, very wealthy as a result. So one day, Mr. Katz is looking at Bernie's wealth, and the envy is growing in his eyes, the frustration over his inability to live that lifestyle. And then that night he goes to sleep, and in his dream, Mr. Katz sees a genie. A genie shows up and appears to Mr. Katz in a dream, and the genie asks Mr. Katz, "Whatever you wish for, I will provide you. However, one simple stipulation, I will provide double to Bernie across the street." So Mr. Katz thinks in his eyes, what's he going to do? And he says, "You know what? I'd like one of my eyes to be poked out." And the sad reality is that for a lot of us, jealousy and envy drives us to the point where all we can think about is what we don't have and what our friends do have. And it really, really can destroy the relationships in our lives, the relationships in our family, in our businesses, with our friends, from the top to the bottom. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife is actually one of the 10 Commandments. It doesn't get as much attention as some of the other ones, but it's right there. It's number 10, and most of the commentaries explain it to mean that one shouldn't be jealous of their neighbor, not just their neighbor's wife, but really it extends to not coveting anything that belongs to our neighbor. The reason it's in the 10 Commandments, quite simply, because it has to be. It is such a fundamental problem that plagues society today. It is not easy to overcome. Don't think for one second that our conversation today is a simple conversation, because it is not an easy trait to control. Everybody succumbs to it at some point in time, and learning to overcome it can be a lifetime of work. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try, and that's what we're going to be discussing today. It's a powerful and destructive emotion. It exists. It can drag you down. Healthy, successful, good, happy people have been brought down simply because of jealousy or envy. Why they don't have the nicer house, the better car, the perfect family. They don't have kids that listen to them. It's ugly and it's dangerous. And guess what? It existed over 3,000 years ago, because as the Torah portion this week tells us, Jacob has 12 sons, but later on will become the 12 tribes of Israel. One of his sons is Joseph, and Joseph is a special guy, very, very talented, very capable, and Jacob feels a sense of closeness with Joseph that he doesn't feel with the other brothers. He just simply feels it specially with Joseph. So the Torah tells us that he makes him a special coat, and he shows him a special relationship, and they learn one-on-one in ways that Jacob did not with his other sons. And part of the fact is that Joseph is the only son at this time of Rachel, his favorite wife. Even though Jacob has 4 wives, he has Rachel, Leah, and the 2 maidservants, Bilhah and Zilpah. However, Rachel is his favorite, and Joseph, being the only offspring at this point born to Rachel, eventually Benjamin is born as well, but Joseph being the eldest, he is the apple of his eye. And Joseph is a sweet boy, but he doesn't exactly work to dispel this theory that he's the favorite son. In fact, he has a dream, and in the dream there are sheaves of wheat. And all of the sheaves bow down to his sheaf that represents him. And he has another dream where there's stars. And these dreams, he highlights the subservience of his brothers to him. And this will later come to pass when he becomes the viceroy of Egypt. But he goes to his brothers and innocently and naively tells them, guys, I want you to know that I had this dream. And so the brothers, as the Torah tells us, they say, not only do you learn individually with dad, and you're seen as dad's favorite, but now you're going to highlight your superiority over all of us? This has gone too far. And indeed, the jealousy and envy grows amongst the brothers and grows to the point where they just want to get rid of him. They don't want to see him anymore. They don't want to be around him. They forget any kinship they have with him. And they decide first that they're going to actually kill him. But Reuven, the oldest of the brothers, manages to convince them not to kill him. He says, you know what? Instead, we'll throw him into a pit. Reuven thinking that later on he will come and rescue Joseph. But after Reuven leaves, Judah decides that he's going to sell Joseph. And that's what takes place. They eventually decide they're going to sell him to merchants traveling away from the land of Israel. And those merchants sell him to other merchants and so on and so forth. He gets sold as a slave. Now remember, this is a lifetime of servitude. He's being sold into slavery. He's going to be someone else's possession. That's it. This is not a sit in the corner for time out. This is not you go live over there. This is not we're going to take a break from each other. That's it. We're done. All because of the jealousy and the envy that they feel towards Joseph. So Joseph gets sold multiple times until he lands in Egypt. And we know the story. Eventually they come down and he's the viceroy and so on and so forth. But let's stop for 1 second. We're talking about the 12 tribes of Israel. We're talking about Joseph's brothers, Jacob's sons. It says quite clearly that all of these men were all righteous individuals. How could righteous people condemn their brother to a lifetime of slavery and servitude? Even more importantly, looking at the source for this action, how could righteous people allow themselves to become so jealous and so envious of Joseph that they would consider such a harsh course of action? How could that take place? It says, in addition to the prohibition on coveting thy neighbor's wife, it says clearly, you shall not hate your brother in your heart. In Vayikra, in Leviticus, in chapter 19, it says, you shall not hate your brother. How can they openly transgress a directive of their faith, of their traditions? When we're talking about pure and righteous people. So the story, as all stories in the Torah, has multiple layers and many different dimensions to it. And the beauty of studying the Torah is that you get to peel off these different layers, and with every layer comes a deeper understanding and appreciation for the lesson it's trying to teach us. Why did they hate him? Why did the brothers hate him? So the classic explanation that's brought is that the straw that broke the camel's back were the dreams, but even more so, the special coat that Jacob made for Joseph. Jacob made a coat of many different colors, and And this coat was a beautiful, expensive coat. It was made only for Joseph. So every time they saw Joseph walking, they saw him wearing this special coat. It reminded and reinforced their feeling of being secondary to Joseph. Now the word for the special coat is pasim. Pasim, which means multicolored. But if you take that word pasim and you break that word into two words, pas yam, it actually means splitting of the sea. And this is the beauty of the Hebrew language, as we've discussed, the etymology of the language, that many words have multiple meanings and can be translated in different ways. So we see instantly a connection between the coat of Joseph and the splitting of the Red Sea. And then it's obvious because the coat and the jealousy that it inspired is what ultimately led the Jewish people into Egypt. Joseph gets sold there. There's a famine. He teaches Egypt how to store grain, so Egypt becomes the height of civilization. And eventually, the Jewish people at the time, the tribes, the 12 brothers, or the 11 brothers, have no choice but to come down to Egypt to get grain. Joseph concocts a scheme in order to basically make sure that the entire family moves to Egypt. And eventually they become slaves, and eventually they become free, and that's how the splitting of the Red Sea happens. So, through a series of events, the multicolored coat ultimately leads to the splitting of the Red Sea. Why is this explanation so paramount and so important? Because without it, you question and ask yourself, how is it that these brothers could have become jealous of Joseph when they were pure and righteous people? Why didn't they feel happy for him? It's definitely not a righteous sign to be harboring envy and jealousy in your hearts. This explanation allows us to say that it was really part of the divine plan. God wanted the Jewish people to land in Egypt. He wanted them to be enslaved, and ultimately so they would leave with great wealth and be forged as a people through difficulty, through obstacle, through challenge, as they did through their slavery in Egypt. And they became a people when they became free. So in order for them to come down to Egypt, we had a series of events, and part of that, or the beginning of that, was the jealousy that the brothers felt. This was an important first step in the series of events. So it wasn't that the brothers naturally felt jealousy, but rather it was initiated and instigated by God to allow this series of events to transpire. And this concept, this theory, is corroborated in multiple sources. There are medrash, there are commentaries. In Jewish mysticism, it brings down this concept as well, in order to explain how these brothers were capable of such a feeling. However, it leaves us with an important question. And the important question is, why does jealousy or envy have to be a fundamental part of the story? If God wants the Jewish people to land in Egypt, okay, I understand. They have to go in order that later they should become free. Why can't they get there through some other means? Why does it have to be that jealousy compels them to go down to Egypt? That jealousy and envy are the beginning of this amazing story, this intricately woven series of events that will lead to the birth of the Jewish people. Why does it have to come from jealousy? If this is God, and it's God's ability to do pretty much anything, choose a different path. Is there actual value that can come from envy? Can it be turned and used as a positive experience? To understand this and resolve this dilemma, to understand the value that jealousy plays in our lives, to see how envy can be turned into a positive, you have to go back to the actual story itself. Because the exile in Egypt is really the source for all exiles and all challenges that come later on for the Jewish people. It's the paradigm for exile, whether the Jewish people being exiled from the land of Israel, or even essentially the exile that we experience till this very day, exile in the fact that we don't visibly see spirituality in the world. We don't live in a society that always supports spirituality. That's also exile. All exiles, all challenges, both communal and personal, are really mimicked and designed based on this original exile in Egypt. So just like we see that exile ultimately led to a freedom for everyone, same too, we know that there are ways to secure freedom from these exiles that we exist now today on a communal level and on a personal level as well. Why do we go through exile? Why? What is the value that we experience when we are subjected to exile? And we are subjected time and time again. It's the story of the Jewish people. They're exiled in Egypt, they're freed, but then they experience multiple exiles from the land of Israel until this very day where they're scattered all across the earth, having been exiled from Europe and from at different period of times and pretty much anywhere. What is the value that can be experienced through exile? And the analogy is similar to an olive. If you take an olive, as we do here at Chabad of South Tampa, because we make olive oil with the kids across the region, across the area, in advance of Hanukkah, which is the festival of light, but celebrating the miracle of the oil lasting for 8 days. So we're very experienced here at making oil. How do you make oil? You crush olives. Quite simply. Take the olive, you squeeze it, out comes the oil. If you don't crush the olive, if you caress the olive, if you massage the olive, will you get the oil? No. You must crush the olive. And only then does it bring out its true value. And a human being is similar. That until a human being is challenged, until he's pressed, you don't see his true value. You can't see what he's fully capable of until that comes to pass. So the exiles, the personal challenges, the communal challenges that these exiles harbored were an opportunity and method to bring out the true value, the ultimate potential of each and every one of each and every human being. That's what they were there for, and that's why they happen time and time and time again. So how do you go about growing from exile and ultimately overcoming your challenges and finding freedom to the point where you are a free person? And what does this have to do with envy? What does it have to do with envy? Because envy is also like an exile. When you become envious of a person, you become constricted and limited. You can think of nothing else. All Mr. Katz can think of is about Bernie and his Lexus, his brand new Lexus, his white picket fence across the street, his neatly manicured lawns, his perfect family. He can't think of anything else. So the envy, the jealousy has exiled Mr. Katz. It has enslaved Mr. Katz. He is no longer a free person. How do you grow out of that? How do you become a free man? How do you leave the shackles of envy behind? So let's look at a perfect example of jealousy. A typical example of jealousy. Your friend Bob calls you up. Okay? Bob is the most common name in America, in case you're wondering. So your friend Bob calls you up and Bob says, Mendy, I want you to hear what just happened. I just got off the phone and I got a huge promotion. Now, you and Bob both work at the same company. And you've both been working in the cubicles, right, for a long time in the farm system of the company, hoping to get your break and working hard to try and see that reality come to fruition. And Bob calls you up and tells you, guess what? He got the promotion. And he's not trying to make you jealous. He's simply sharing good news with his friend. But what is the first feeling that you have in your heart? The first feeling that you have is, why did Bob get that promotion and not me? That's your first feeling. Because that's natural, that's human instinct, to feel envy or jealousy. It's been implanted in us that we should feel that way. Why is it that that's your first feeling? Because in your life, the world revolves around, not Bob, it revolves around you. A human being naturally feels self-centered, and therefore, what is most important? Whatever relates to them. That is what's most important to them. And when a person is self-centered, nothing else is as meaningful, nothing else is as important as their life. Envy is a natural byproduct, a natural offshoot of self-centeredness. When a person is narcissistic, when a person is arrogant, conceited, whatever terminology you want to use, when the world revolves around them, it is hard for them to be happy for someone else. because it's all about me and what I either have or I don't have. And that's why envy is so fundamental in breaking down a society. Where does it come from? Envy can be dated all the way back to the first people. I don't mean the first people here. I mean the first people on earth, Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve lived in the Garden of Eden, a pure life, a spiritual life, and then what happens? They eat from the tree of knowledge. What does it mean they eat from the tree of knowledge? They eat from the tree of self-awareness. Till that time, they are not aware of themselves. The world doesn't revolve around them. They don't know that they are true existence. They simply live in this blissful spiritual zone. But then they eat from the tree of knowledge. Now they know. What do they know? They know in their mind they exist. I exist. What as a result takes place? They become embarrassed of their nakedness. They were naked beforehand, but they never thought of the potential in a human body for sin, or the potential in a human body for shame, and how it can be used in many different ways, some of them not so positive. They never thought about that before. That never entered their mind, never entered their psyche. They didn't think about their existence that much. So therefore, there was nothing to be embarrassed of. But now, everything revolves around them. The good, the bad, and the ugly. And so they're embarrassed. They're shameful. But even more than that, they are self-centered. They're conceited. And that's why they can no longer stay in the Garden of Eden. Because in the Garden of Eden, it's all about nullification, the lack of self. That's what spirituality is. And once you think about yourself more than anything else, you become less spiritual. You know, when you're sitting there one day at home and you pick up a great book. And this book is so interesting, it's so compelling. You're reading the book, you just can't put it down. And in the middle of reading this book, your sister starts to call your name. She's trying to get your attention. She calls you once, and she calls you twice. Nothing. Finally, she comes and she literally starts banging on your head until she gets your attention. Why? What has taken place? You are not self-aware. You are so absorbed in the book that nothing else exists. You don't even exist. Just the book, just the story. That's what took place in the Garden of Eden. And once they had the knowledge of themselves, they became aware, and therefore, as a result, they became embarrassed of their nakedness, and at times envious. Because self-centeredness always leads to jealousy and envy. Because there's no time in this world that you will have everything. You will always be missing something that somebody else has. That's the way God created the world. So if you are more focused on what you either have or don't have, if the world revolves primarily around you, how should you not feel jealousy or envy? It's only natural. It's only natural. This is why jealousy and envy ultimately lead to such quarrels. Because when it comes to ourselves, we always are going to err on the side of caution. We're always going to feel, listen, I made a mistake, but you know what? I had this excuse, I had that reason, and so on and so forth. We always love ourselves so much that we'll cover over any feelings of mistakes, any feelings of inferiority, anything that possibly we've done wrong. We'll find the silver lining. But with our friends, we're not as forgiving. We're not as forgiving. Jealousy and envy ultimately are found in every single negative trait and negative characteristic that a human being possesses. It's the foundation stone. Because jealousy and envy basically say, it's all about me. It's all about me. So if you're listening to this discussion and you're asking yourself, wow, that's pretty bad, what possible hope is there for humanity? If the natural instincts of a human being are to think of themselves and their existence, which that will ultimately breed jealousy and envy, and jealousy and envy destroy people, relationships and families and businesses, then what hope is there for humanity? What hope is there for society? But it's not all bad news. Here's where jealousy and envy can be harnessed for positivity, for good, and for growth. Because yes, it's true that we have an ego. But until we become jealous and envious, we're not conscious about our ego. So we can be doing things in life, foolish things, that simply revolve around ourselves, without being conscious of it. We just naturally don't think about other people. And then all of a sudden we become jealous and we become envious. And in that point of time, we start to ask ourselves, okay, all I do now is think about Jack and the fact that Jack has something that I want. So this point where you start to realize, why am I constantly thinking about Jack? Why is my life, my thought process only revolve around Jack? It doesn't make sense. Shouldn't I be thinking about myself? And this starts the conversation in our minds. It starts the process where we start to think, maybe I have allowed jealousy and envy to cloud my better judgment. Why? Why can't I simply be happy for Jack? Because I love myself too much. And if I love myself too much, I can't think about anyone else and anything else. I can't see the positivity that anyone else might possess. So feeling jealous or envious can, in fact, actually become a motivator for good and for growth. When we start to get to the point where we ask ourselves, how can I spend so much of my day thinking about that other person? It reminds us that we might be off course. We might be off path. So we've looked at jealousy and envy from multiple perspectives. We see the bad part of it. We see the detrimental part of jealousy and envy. We see how it can pull people down and tear people and relationships apart. But we've also looked at the positive side of jealousy and envy, how it can be a bump in the road that stops us in our tracks and says, I care about myself too much. The world does not only revolve around me. And you know how I know this? Because look, every waking moment, I'm just thinking what I don't have and what he has. That's my line in the sand. That's when I know I've gone too far. Jealousy and envy can also be that positive point in life. So let's see, what are some of the positive aspects and dimensions that come out of it? How about jealousy and envy in our studying? You can look at someone else and say, wow, look how studious that person is. Look how well they're doing in school. Look how great their grades are. Look at the fact that they're able to focus when they sit down and learn. Look how much time they're able to devote to studying Torah. Look how many JLI classes that person goes to. Look how many Shabbat dinners they have. Look how often they attend shul. That's positive envy. That's envy not born out of loving ourselves, but envy out of our desire to be more connected spiritually, to be more productive, to be more holistic. That's positive envy. That's positive jealousy. And we can harness those feelings to really motivate ourselves. It says about Rachel that Rachel saw her sister Leah give birth to multiple boys, the future tribes of the Jewish people, and yet Rachel was barren. And it says she was jealous. What did that motivate her to do? It motivated her to give her maidservant up to Jacob as a wife, which ultimately increased the tribes of Israel. Her jealousy directly increased the tribes of Israel because it wasn't jealousy to say, oh, look, the world is only about me. I'm the only one that doesn't have everything that I want. No, Rachel was saying, listen, I want Jacob to have the tribes. And I want to be part of that if possible. And if I can't be part of that, what can I do? Oh, here's what I can do. I can offer up my maidservant. So jealousy and envy can become positive influences in our lives if we're only willing to open up our minds to other existences, to other realities. When the brothers, going back to our original story, saw Joseph, they saw what had taken place, this special coat that Jacob had given, because Joseph was so focused on his studies, so committed to being a good son to his father Jacob, and they saw this tremendous spiritual connection. They were jealous. They wanted to experience the same thing in their lives, but they didn't know how. To them, the only way that they could experience that sense of connection was to complete the next chapter in the story. And that was to bring Joseph and sell him as a slave off to Egypt. When they were able to sell him off to Egypt, that was their only way to use the jealousy and envy in a positive manner, because that would allow Joseph to go and become the great viceroy that he was destined to become. And yes, sometimes we know that we've been given the short end of the stick. And we look at other people that haven't worked as hard as us. We look at other people that haven't studied as hard as us. And we see their success. And our first temptation is to say, why them and not me? So when that happens to you, I want you to stop yourself. Stop for one moment and say, forget about me. It's not about me in this moment. It's about them and their happiness. They're happy. They're successful. I'm thrilled. Now, how do I motivate myself to be more productive? How do I motivate myself to be more positive? How do I motivate myself to be more successful? That's step 2. It's unrelated to the happiness that theirs experienced, because there's no limit on happiness. Just because he's got a Lexus across the street doesn't mean that you can't get one. So forget about why him and not me, and focus on how me. How can I lift myself up? How can I be more positive and more productive? What can I do to take my life to the next level? Jealousy and envy are not bad if we use it as a catalyst for growth. Just like any exile is a catalyst for growth, so too jealousy and envy can be the exact same experience if we don't indulge it. So the next time that you're sitting and you look out and you see something, and it's something that you're missing in your life, whether it be something material, but even more so something spiritual, something holistic, something positive and productive, and you start to get that little bit, that tinge of jealousy enters your mind, full stop. Don't engage it. Instead, ask yourself, how do I motivate myself to raise my standards, to raise myself to be as positive and productive as that individual? Because I'm so happy for what they have, I want to be able to have the same thing too. And if we look on how to lift ourselves up rather than pull other people down, we will elevate our entire people and our entire society as a whole. I want to thank you for joining me today for this installation of Mondays with Mendy, happening every Monday at 12 o'clock. You can ask me any questions, email me any critiques, any comments about today's discussion at our email, askmendy, A-S-K-M-E-N-D-Y, @gmail.com. Next week's discussion will center on why we as a people are required to engage with the world around us. Why PR for the Jewish people is so important, and we can't choose to simply cut ourselves off from society and live in the Himalayan mountains. Mark November 27th off on your calendars, the first night of Hanukkah. We will be having Jewish Heritage Night at the Tampa Bay Times Forum together with the Tampa Bay Lightning. And December 1st, where we'll be having a big festival for Hanukkah at Hyde Park Village. Please mark those dates on your calendar and visit our website for all information, www.chabadsouthampa.com. Thanks again, and have a wonderful rest of the day.